Hello and welcome to Meet the Patient, brought to you by A Life in a Day. As part of our ongoing commitment to enable people working in the healthcare sector to increase their understanding, empathy and patient focus, in our series of interviews, we're asking people living with a condition or a disease to go beyond the clinical and share their personal stories to really demonstrate the impact that it has on relationships, family, friendships, work and their emotional well-being. And today our focus is on chronic inflammatory demyelinating polyneuropathy, or CIDP. And I'm really delighted to introduce Jamie Shill. Hi Jamie, thank you so much for speaking to me today.
Hi, it's so lovely to speak to you today.
So I'd like to begin by asking, what do you think is one thing that people need to be most aware of when they think about living with CIDP?
No one tells you, no doctor or physio or anyone like that tells you when you're disabled. And there's no set marker that says, if you can't do this or you can't do that, you're disabled. It's kind of a label that we have to identify with ourselves. And for so many people with CIDP, even if treatment has been successful, we are left with many symptoms, often causing disability. For myself, I use a walker and mostly use a wheelchair. And I think I had to come to terms with and realize myself that I was disabled and that I would be disabled for the rest of my life. But that disability is not necessarily a negative term, it's just a descriptive one. And I've found that once I did identify that CIDP had made me disabled, I felt much more connected to the disability community. I had a lot more support, and it also allowed me to be gentler with myself and to really give myself the grace I need to rest, to do my medical treatments, and to connect with others and get the help that I needed.
You say that the medical teams around you didn't sort of help you to identify when this might happen. Were you prepared for it at all, do you think? Or sort of was it explained to you that this might be the outcome for you, or were you sort of on your own with that?
I think my medical team saw a young woman who was probably a similar age to their daughters and really didn't want to admit that my nerve damage would be forever. For me, we did lots and lots of treatment, but it became clear after many months of treatment that we were never going to get my full nerve function back. And so I think I was actually quicker to accept that than my medical team. I really wanted to be focused on my quality of life, and I was really overjoyed that the CIDP had stopped spreading up my limbs and that we'd halted it. And so that was a real win for me, even though I think my medical team still were like, this young woman, she still has all of these effects from CIDP, and she's in a wheelchair most of the time. And so they saw that as more of a failure than I did. And because for me, the alternative of my CIDP continuing to spread was so awful, that didn't seem like, it still felt like a win to me that we'd gotten as far as we had with treatment. But yeah, it's only been in the follow-ups in the years after that my team has sort of come to terms with that and stopped trying to do anything under the sun to make it better when it was clear that my nerves were really damaged and we weren't going to get that function back.
Could you share with us how being diagnosed and living with CIDP has impacted on your family and your loved ones around you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a really wonderful family. I'm very lucky. I've got my twin sister, Rebecca. She's an identical twin. And then I have my mum and dad who are really wonderful, and I couldn't be more grateful for them. Initially, when I was still in the process of being diagnosed, the main effect from my CIDP was that it scared the life out of all of us. There were times that I was being tested for brain tumors or heavy metal poisoning and this and that and the next thing. And each test we would be terrified to hear the answers, and it wasn't just affecting me, it was also affecting everyone around me. And so that was hard to see my family struggle in that way and be scared for me. But since my diagnosis, it sort of that diagnosis lifted a little bit of that fear away from my family. And then they really just switched into support mode and have been really wonderful to me. One of my big fears was that because my sister and I are identical twins, that this would happen to her as well. But thankfully she's doing really well, and she hasn't ever had anything like this. So there might be some predisposition there, but we've done genetic testing and haven't found anything, which was a huge relief for me. And it means as well that like I have her support, I've got my parents' support, I have my wonderful partner's support as well. And so I've got this great network that have made such a difference to my care and its outcomes. So I've been very lucky with my family.
You talk very positively about your diagnosis and living with your condition, but I just wondered, what sort of impact has living with CIDP had on your emotional well-being and your mental health?
A really massive one. Some ways good, some ways bad. But the biggest thing with my mental health has been that some of the procedures and treatments that I had to go through, such as lumbar punctures, were really traumatic and have left me with some PTSD. Which I go to psychology for. I take antidepressants. I am all for leaning into those other like routes to look after my mental health, because I think in some ways, if not more important, it's just as important as my physical health. You want to be happy, and you can have nerve pain and be happy. You can go out in your wheelchair in public and be happy. So for me, I think it's something I really make sure to look after. And whether that's talking with friends or family or my psychologist or taking the medication I need to, I really look after that. But that's not to say that some days I don't struggle. I still have nightmares about treatments and procedures. I I think, some of these procedures that to a medical professional might seem mundane and everyday, to a young person or any person at all, they are terrifying experiences, and they can really have a lasting effect. And so I'm really grateful for the care that I have in that regard, and that we're really on top of my mental health. But I I wish I also didn't have those experiences that I have to live with the memories of now.
And how easy did you find it accessing those supports and treatments? So, was it offered to you? Did you have to sort of actively go and seek it? What was your experience of that?
I really had to actively seek out that help myself. It was something that wasn't talked about or offered by my neurologists or my medical team. Um, Thankfully, my GP is quite on top of that sort of thing, and I found a really good psychologist through her, but it was definitely something that I had to seek out. It's also quite expensive here in Australia to have regular psychology appointments. The government will pay for 10 a year, but if you're going every fortnight, then there's another, 15 or 16 that you're paying for out of pocket, and that can be very expensive. So I'm grateful that my parents helped me pay for that, and they really value that treatment as for my mental health, and so they've been really amazing. But it's I wish it was more readily offered and thought about prior to procedures and after procedures as well. If a patient, there were plenty of times that it was very clear when I was in hospital that I wasn't coping well with my mental health, and I wish that it had been more readily available to me inside the neurology CIDP bubble instead of having to be on the outside of that. I've had anxiety, ironically, around medical procedures since I was a child. And so it wasn't a shock to me that I was having panic attacks for procedures and that sort of thing. And I think because my display or like the way that my anxiety manifests in, say, a panic attack is very visible, it wasn't just apparent to me, it was also apparent to the people around me that that was a mental health side effect. And I'm in some ways almost grateful that it was so obvious or that it was clear that I was having that kind of mental health problems from the procedures and treatment and everything, because I then was able to reach out and get the help I needed. But I know for a lot of people that's just not the case. I've found that the nurses caring for me when I've been having a panic attack or going through a procedure have been excellent. And just someone saying, like, I'm going to be with you. I've had nurses gown up in the not radioactive, the like lead lined suit so they can come into a lumbar puncture with me and hold my hand. And those like small acts of kindness really mean the world when you're in that kind of situation. I've, on the other hand, found that there were doctors who were doing, say, the lumbar puncture who couldn't have even told me my name and weren't talking to me or were talking about me. And so they made those panic attacks worse because I felt even more out of control and not listened to. So I think the way that they're handled by medical staff, particularly during a procedure, is really important as to how the patient feels coming out of it.
We talk about your wonderful family and your twin sister, but what about friendships? How has living with CIDP impacted your social life and your friendship group?
It's really massively affected my friendship group. Before getting sick, I was doing my PhD, I was at uni, I was surrounded by other people all at uni doing their PhD, and they were my friends. But as soon as I got sick and wasn't at uni, I noticed none of them were reaching out to see how I was. And when I was in hospital, it became very clear that they weren't interested in that kind of complex friendship where they were having to come see me in hospital and that sort of thing. So none of those friends went to see me in hospital or anything like that. And that really showed me that they weren't the kind of friendships that I thought they were, which was pretty heartbreaking at the time. But it did show me long term who my people are. And that's something I'm really grateful for, because there were family members and friends from other parts of my life that really stepped up and were really there for me. And I've also met other people who live with varying different conditions who have become some of my best friends. And so it's definitely taken me a while to sort of grieve those friendships and that life that I was living that was so carefree. But I think the friendships I have now are much more deep and understanding, empathetic relationships. It was pretty tough to go through that at such a young age. I think a lot of people don't have that kind of experience where they work out who the good time friends are until much later in life. But in some ways, like now, I'm very grateful for that and grateful that I can I can spot a friend that will be there for me a mile off. And I just don't put a lot of energy into those like good time friends, friends that are only there when you're feeling up and positive and can go out and pretend to be normal. So I I don't value those relationships as much anymore. And I do value and put extra effort into the other relationships. And I think in the long run, that's a very good thing, even if it was very painful to learn.
So I did have one other question actually, and I wanted to ask you about your career and your work life and how living with and being diagnosed with CIDP has impacted on that for you.
Yeah, I was doing my PhD in astrophysics and I
Right.
had, thank you, I had dreamed of being an astrophysicist since I knew what the word meant. Even before that, as a little kid, I would open up all the I wonder why the stars twinkle type of books and read them over and over again. I've always been fascinated with astronomy. But I, when I got sick, I was still really determined that I was just going to power through. And in the end, my illness meant that I had to initially just take a break and I was going to go back. And I did go back. But then it became really apparent that even doing my PhD part-time wasn't really feasible for where my health was at and was meaning that I wasn't able to put the time and effort into my health and that I really needed to at the time. And so I had to stop doing my PhD. I had two very supportive supervisors, which was amazing, but I was pretty devastated to stop it, and I didn't know what I would do next. I wasn't sure at all. As it turns out, the thing that I'm doing at the moment is that I am a freelance writer for Rare Disease Advisor, and so I get to share my experience with the couple of rare diseases I have, and that goes back into patient education, very much like A Life in a Day does. And it's something that I find really fulfilling. And getting sick has changed my whole view on what I view as fulfilling, not only what I'm capable of, but also what I want to spend my energy on because it is limited. And while astronomy and astrophysics is fascinating and beautiful and I love it, it wasn't actively helping people. And I now find that things that are actively helping people, whether that be the writing I do for Rare Disease Advisor or some of even like the social media content that I make that's trying to normalize disabled bodies in fashion, I find that more fulfilling, even if it doesn't sound as fancy or it's not the career I had dreamed of. I I really do find it fulfilling, and I hope that I can sort of build on that and continue to do work in that patient advocacy space, and even things that seem kind of vain to some people or maybe don't hold that same importance in their mind, like making social media fashion content. It's the fact that it's representing disabled bodies in that space is new. Like we're not well represented in fashion at all. And I have had messages from mums of little girls who are in wheelchairs saying, I get to show them this, and they can look up and see someone who is wearing fashionable clothes and looks, feels good in themselves and is represented in that space. And I I can only imagine what that would have felt like when I was 23 and first became a wheelchair user, let alone someone who's a little girl and who has to grow up in a world that is not built for us, and that they can finally see themselves represented and hopefully as beautiful. So
Listen, Jamie, it's been absolutely lovely speaking to you. Thank you so much for your time. We're at the end of our chat now, but thank you again for speaking to me, sharing your story. I'm absolutely sure that everything that you've shared will really help people to understand further what it's like to live with CIDP. And thank you to everyone who's listened. And if you're interested in finding out some more about the work that we do at A Life in a Day, please follow us on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. Thank you.
thank you.